and this presentation really is to introduce you to the new PRINCE2 Agile product and to essentially talk to you about how PRINCE2 has essentially morphed into the ability to deal with Agile-related projects. So I suppose over the years, some have come to see PRINCE2 in sort of different ways. And certainly in all the training and consulting work that I've done, I've heard people say that PRINCE2 is too bureaucratic. It's over-controlling. It's pretty suffocating at times. I've even heard people say that it's quite stiff and inflexible. I've also heard comments to the degree that it is too prescriptive, in that it's the PRINCE2 way or no way. And I've even heard terms being mentioned to me, certainly not agile. Prince could certainly not be agile. And I suppose over the years, Prince has developed this reputation that it is a very solid methodology for the delivering of projects, but certainly is not very agile or adaptable to new ways of work in modern business. Now, the reality, however, is that Prince is very tailorable and scalable. So those of you who have joined the webinar today that are PRINCE2 practitioners or have done PRINCE2 Foundation or might have used PRINCE2 in some particular way, if you cast your minds back to when you did the course and did the exam, one of the 7 principles of PRINCE2 was that it was tailored to suit the environment. Now, the thing really is that what's been missing is Prince has never really provided any guidance on what this tailoring is all about. So if you remember back to your PRINCE2 training and your exams, we know that anything below the team manager level, which is really at the level where the work gets done on the project, PRINCE2 is not prescriptive. So it essentially says whichever method or framework or way of work that the team manager wants to adopt in the way that they get the activities or the deliverables or the products for the project done, PRINCE2 will not prescribe how that happens. But everything above the team manager through to the project manager and up into the board, well, that would have to be done using Prince. So you've almost got this reality that Prince has always accepted a degree of flexibility, a degree of adaptability, but they've never ever provided any guidance as to how that works. What PRINCE2 Agile now does is it provides the project manager who utilizes Prince with the guidance of how to actually use Prince in an agile way. So this is the really primary development in the evolution of PRINCE2 and obviously Agile as these two elements meet. You also see that from a PRINCE2 perspective, it is very accommodating of Agile, but it doesn't accept fragile. So one of the things that we've got to worry about when we are running projects and using Agile behaviors, concepts, and techniques is that the project doesn't become fragile, i.e. losing all of its controls, losing all of the governance that we depend upon when we work in a PRINCE2 way. So the new PRINCE2 Agile accepts that there is a level of control that is required, but we also need agility in the way that we actually deliver the project without putting the project at risk of failure, i.e. without becoming fragile. We also see that the new PRINCE2 Agile framework supports control. So it doesn't say that you lose control. It still requires you to do control, but you're doing control in a very different way to the way that we used to do the traditional PRINCE2 approach. It provides governance, and it certainly supports empowerment. And empowerment at an agile level essentially means that the team is self-directed. It doesn't really require the project manager to instruct the team on how to get the work done. As long as there is agreement on the broad targets and the tolerances for the work that's got to be done, then essentially the team are fully empowered to deliver it, to change the priorities within that time box, to essentially discover the detail without having to go through change control, but knowing that if the breadth of the project changes, then obviously managing by exception would have to occur. So you can see that PRINCE2 in reality at the level of agility supports the fundamentals of strong empowerment at the team level, which we wouldn't have thought possible in the early versions of PRINCE2. We also see that PRINCE2 is very project adaptable, which means that no matter what type of project we're engaged in, whether it's new product development or an IT platform conversion or a merger or acquisition, we could use Prince, and in particular, we could use PRINCE2 Agile. And part of the seminar today is to actually show you what PRINCE2 Agile actually looks like and how, to a degree, it is different to the traditional PRINCE2, but is very similar to what PRINCE2 has always advocated in terms of tailored to suit the environment. So let's go and have a look at PRINCE2 Agile. When we look at PRINCE2 Agile, one of the things that we really get a strong message from is that PRINCE2 Agile is not the way, but a way. So some people would have thought about PRINCE2 in its original format as the way, whereas PRINCE2 Agile is not advocating that PRINCE2 Agile is the way, it is rather a way of actually getting projects delivered, blending the tried and tested methodology of PRINCE2 with the modern delivery of work in terms of Agile. So it's not one or the other. It's essentially saying, can we take the best of both worlds and bring them together to deliver projects using agility, but the control that is so valuable within PRINCE2. So have a look at this diagram. If you think about traditional PRINCE2, you can see that PRINCE2 at the traditional level likes to support more of a waterfall approach. So quite linear, quite serial. The only problem with that is that essentially we deliver nothing to the business until essentially the end of the project. Whereas if we look at agile ways of work, we see that is more iterative and more incremental, meaning that there are sort of mini waterfalls. And at the end of each mini waterfall, there is a product or a service that gets delivered into operational use. So one of the disbenefits of using PRINCE2 is that the business would have to wait quite a long time before they actually got a product that they could take into operational use and start gaining benefits from that. One of the main attractions for using Agile is that we don't have to wait until the end of the project to get outputs. We could actually get outputs incrementally, which means that there would be early benefit realization. So in the normal Agile way of work, the attraction is early benefit realization. In the traditional PRINCE2 environment, we know we've got all of this control, but we often have to wait quite a long time until we actually get the final deliverable of the project. When you actually pull these two together and you bring in the controls of Prince and the scalability and adaptability of Prince with the modern ways of Agile work, we essentially end up with PRINCE2 Agile. And as the seminar continues, you will see how I unpack and show you the scale and the virtuality of how this PRINCE2 Agile product operates and why it is going to become one of the fundamental frameworks for how we deliver projects with control, but using Agile ways of working. So when we look at blending PRINCE2 and Agile into PRINCE2 Agile, what do we see? We see that PRINCE2 has its strength in areas of project direction, project management control. However, it provides very little focus on how we actually deliver the product. When we look at Agile, we see that Agile has a very strong focus on product delivery, but it's relatively light in the area of project direction and project management control. So you can see that when you take the traditional Prince and you take Agile ways of working and you take the strengths and weaknesses of both and you merge them together, you essentially now see that you've got a method of control that is still required to bring governance to the project, but you've got all of those Agile ways of working that are now essentially liberated in the process of running a PRINCE2 Agile project. Now, this little diagram or this picture tries to illustrate the blending process. If you look at the new Eurofighter, some would say that it is probably the most unstable aircraft that has ever been built. However, this instability allows it to have agility. But without state-of-the-art controls and governances within the cockpit, the aeroplane would essentially fall out of the sky. So on the one hand, you've got this flexibility and agility in the airframe, but without the controls in the cockpit, essentially this Eurofighter would be of no value to anybody. So in the Eurofighter, as an example, you've brought the two worlds together, the worlds of agility, flexibility, adaptability, and speed with the level of control. And when you can merge these two worlds together, you essentially get the best possible outputs that you can get out of the product with the control of the project environment. So this is what this tries to illustrate, and you'll see as I go further, as we start unpacking the product, you'll see how the blending process works. So when we blend PRINCE2 and Agile together, what do we basically see? Rather than looking on the left-hand side of the screen, let's concentrate on the right-hand side of the screen for a moment. When we talk about Agile, we talk about behaviors, practices, tools, techniques, and concepts that we can use in the normal business as usual. For example, running an enhancement or a software upgrade using Agile and having a Scrum Master running a Scrum team delivering the business as usual enhancements, well, that's business as usual. That is part of what we refer to as running the business. When we look on the left-hand side, we see project work, which is essentially what we refer to as changing the business. And this is where we need good controls. We need project direction, we need project management, we need the ability to start up the project effectively, we need to plan the project well, we need to execute it, and then we need to make sure that the product of the project goes into the live environment. So on the left-hand side, we've got changing the business, and on the right-hand side, we've got running the business. Now, typically, Agile practices have been used in running the business, whereas PRINCE2 methodology has been used to change the business. How do we bring these two worlds together? How do we take the very best of Agile practices that we normally use in the business as usual and bring them into how we change the business when we're running a project? And essentially the new PRINCE2 Agile product provides the guidance of how do project people still use the benefits of PRINCE2 in planning and executing and controlling the project, while allowing the team members who need to get the work of the project done to use Agile practices. And essentially, one might think that that is quite simple, but if you don't have the blending guidance, you essentially have a square peg in a round hole. You have team members who want to work in an Agile way at the task level, and you're wanting the project manager to drive the project at the PRINCE2 level, at the project level. And essentially, there's a disconnect. So what PRINCE2 Agile does is it blends these two practices together. So we really have a round peg in a round hole. So the next diagram should basically give us an indication of what that blending looks like. Now, essentially, it looks like a cake. And I suppose to some degree, when the artists put this blending together, that's what they were trying to essentially show, that there are layers in this PRINCE2 Agile as these elements fit together. So what you'll see at the very top is you've got the normal project direction, you've then got the project management, and then you've got the Agile delivery. So the strength lies in blending these components together. So what you'll see is we still have the control at the top layer, but we have the agility at the delivery layer. And what we see is that the thinking of PRINCE2 cascades down, but the Agile thinking rises up. So that means that essentially these two worlds meet. How do they meet? Because PRINCE2 Agile allows the project manager to essentially recalibrate the traditional PRINCE2 approach to planning and execution with the agile ways of working. And what the agile ways of working do, they blend in to the traditional ways in which a PRINCE2 project operates. So what you're seeing here is not PRINCE2 at this level and Agile at this level. What we're seeing in PRINCE2 Agile is essentially a recalibration of both the normal control and command with the agility and flexibility of work to form a new framework called PRINCE2 Agile. So when you integrate these two, what do you basically see? So at the very heart of PRINCE2 Agile, you see the normal environment of PRINCE2. You see the fundamental principles that every project requires a valid business case, that we need to manage by exception, that we need to tailor to suit the environment. All of those fundamental principles are still there. Those 7 themes that Prince is so solid on in terms of plans and quality, organization, business case, progress, change, and risk, they are still there. However, they have been blended into typical agile behaviors of empowerment, agile focus areas, which I'll share with you in a moment, different agile techniques like time boxing and sprints and scrum, agile concepts like lean and different frameworks. These elements of agile have been brought into the mix and have been blended into the agile environment. Now, how you actually do that and what the guidance for doing that is, nobody has ever provided to practicing project managers in the past. So they've almost had to almost engineer on the go, trying to apply a very rigid PRINCE2 process with an agile working team. There's never been any guidance on how these pieces work together. So the new Axelos PRINCE2 Agile product essentially provides these guidances. It tells us what we can now shape and bend in PRINCE2 and integrate with Agile. It tells us what we can take in Agile practices and how we can blend them into PRINCE2 in order to form the basis of PRINCE2 Agile. And it's important to note at this moment in time that not every project is a PRINCE2 Agile project. There will be projects that we still require to run in a very PRINCE2 way. And that might be driven by the risk involved in the project or the actual governances that we want to apply, or the fact that we really are unable to tolerate a high degree of change. Require agility, lots of flexibility, where the customer doesn't always know exactly what they want at the very beginning, and there's going to be lots of change as the project progresses, and there's expectations of early benefits. And we still want to use Prince in terms of its control, but we want to use agility in terms of its delivery. Well, now we have PRINCE2 Agile. So we don't have to try and run an agile project in a very stiff PRINCE2 way. We've actually got a very effective blending process. We don't want to throw away what was good about PRINCE2 and ignore that, but we also don't want to just fundamentally drive agile practices onto a PRINCE2 environment that makes it fragile. We want to be able to get the best blend of both of these worlds, and this is what the new PRINCE2 Agile product actually provides for us. So when we look at this integration, this diagram to some degree will be familiar to those who work in a PRINCE2 environment. So what you'll see at the normal PRINCE2 process is the starting up of the project, initiating. As we go to executing the project, we control the stages. We have our normal stage boundaries, and eventually until the project reaches its end. But when we overlay typical agile practices within PRINCE2, what do we see? We see that at the starting up in the IP level, we are now looking at things like vision and product backlog. In controlling a stage, we are driving the stage using sprints and sprint backlogs, and driving our controlling stages using 2 to 4 week sprints. And then at the end of a stage, i.e. at the end of a series of sprints, we have a potentially shippable product, which is quite different to the way that we used to do it in PRINCE2, where the shippable product would have only had been at the very end of the project. So you can see this is an example of how a PRINCE2 in its normal processes is blending very effectively with the Agile ways of work. And this is what the new PRINCE2 Agile framework provides us. And I use the word framework and not methodology. PRINCE2 was a methodology. We could say that Agile is a framework of different practices, concepts, and techniques. We blend these two together, and we're now sitting with PRINCE2 Agile, a very effective framework for running projects that need to use Agile ways of delivery. Now, when we look at PRINCE2 Agile, we see that PRINCE2 Agile provides the guidance of how to configure and tune PRINCE2 so that PRINCE2 can be used in the most effective way when we combine it with Agile ways of working. Which you will remember from what I've said earlier, we've never really had that guidance. PRINCE2 Agile is structured to support the typical Agile behaviors that we see in business today, being collaborative, self-organizing teams, very customer-focused, empowered with a lot of trust and no blaming in the process of delivery. We also see that in PRINCE2 Agile, we also accept the concepts of prioritizing what gets delivered. So using methods like Moscow, working iteratively and incrementally. Iteratively meaning pieces of work that essentially deliver elements of the product in increments. So rather than waiting for the product at the very end of the project, we are delivering portions of the product incrementally throughout the life of the project. Also understanding that in an Agile way, there isn't expectation that we're going to deliver everything. We will deliver what is priority. Whereas in PRINCE2, traditionally, we would be expected to deliver everything. In PRINCE2 Agile, we do not expect to deliver everything because in Agile ways of work, we prioritize. We also know that in an Agile environment, we deliver on time and on cost. That is immovable. In PRINCE2, we could move those things by raising an exception. Whereas in PRINCE2 Agile, those things are fixed, and they therefore have to be managed in that fixed way. We also know that in Agile practices, we inspect and we adapt using what we refer to as fail-fast techniques. So you can see that the green bits have always been the typical Agile way of working. The blue bits at the top have always been the traditional PRINCE2 way of working. And when we blend them together, we essentially get this rich ability to apply control with Agile ways of work. And that's where the value of this new certification lies. We also see that PRINCE2 Agile works very well with Agile techniques for reporting, like burn down charts or burn up charts, user stories, epics, retrospectives and time boxing, Kanban boards, lean, and lean startup, as well as limiting work in progress. Those are all very solid Agile practices which we haven't seen working in a PRINCE2 way. So rather than producing our traditional checkpoint report or highlight report that we might have done in PRINCE2, we would be producing burn down charts or burn up charts. We would be running retrospectives, which really tie into PRINCE2's learn from experience. We would be running time boxes, which might be multiple time boxes within a stage. Rather than having a lot of draconian reporting mechanisms, we might just run a Kanban board, which is a visual representation of what the project is doing. So rather than pushing information to various stakeholders, the Kanban practices allow people to pull information. So you can see as I'm talking, this does require our traditional PRINCE2 project managers to really think in an Agile mindset. And we've never really had any guidance on how to do that. We've known about the practices, but we've relied heavily on our PRINCE2 tried and tested crutch, as it were, to deliver the very controlled mechanism of a project. But we've always felt as project managers that we are not fitting very well with the Agile practices. And you almost have to go learn Agile practices on their own and wonder how you might blend that into the traditional elements of PRINCE2. Well, you don't have to wonder anymore. PRINCE2 Agile essentially provides the guidance of exactly how to do that. And the course that we run essentially trains the project manager on how to blend Agile practices with the traditional PRINCE2 ways of delivering a project in order to come up with a sense of PRINCE2 Agile. So when we look at agility and PRINCE2, we see what is now referred to in the new product as the Hexagon. Some of you would have been exposed to this under the normal PRINCE2 when we spoke about the 6 aspects of a project: time, cost, quality, scope, risk, benefits. Well, we've got those again in PRINCE2 Agile. The only difference now is that in PRINCE2 Agile, time and cost are fixed. We don't flex them because that's a fundamental of Agile. Benefits and risk, while we may fix them, we may also flex them. That's quite an interesting concept in PRINCE2 Agile. And when it comes to scope and quality, in an Agile environment, we expect that those will flex. So what you will notice here in taking the practices of Agile and taking the practices of Prince, we've got this blending of these 6 aspects, or what we often have referred to as targets. Our time and cost targets we are going to fix. We can't flex them in an Agile world. Our benefits and risk, well, we may flex them. We could also fix them if we needed to. And certainly quality and scope are definitely areas that we can flex, because given that we've locked down time and cost, the only place that it is reasonable to flex is on scope and the quality associated to that. But how do you get that across to your customer? How do you get that across to your team? And how do you still make sure that you've got the PRINCE2 controls, but you've got the Agile flexibility? And part of what we teach in this particular program is how to work with this fixing and flexing mechanism that essentially blends the best of Prince with the best of Agile. So PRINCE2 Agile, Agile with control. So what you will find when we train in this particular new product and the way that it is practiced in the workplace, a lot more use of visual ways of producing progress information. So in a PRINCE2 Agile, we may not see those traditional checkpoint reports or those highlight reports. We may not see those end-of-stage reports and end-of-project reports. We may simply see burn down and burn up charts, which is essentially an indication of the number of user stories that we are delivering against the actual user stories that we're delivering, or on the burn-up chart, the number of changes or work that has been removed or added by the customer as we actually deliver against the requirements for the project. We will also see that within this environment, a lot more focus on things like user stories. So rather than using product descriptions, as we would have used in PRINCE2, we are now using user stories rather than product descriptions. Rather than using a project product description that we would have used in Prince, we might be using a visioning document in PRINCE2 Agile. So there you can see the typical blending of the requirement to start up the project well, but rather than writing a project product description, we'll write a vision document for the project. Rather than writing product descriptions during IP, we will actually be writing user stories during IP. Rather than actually running the project in stages, we could be running the project in sprints. Rather than producing highlight reports and checkpoint reports, we'll be producing burn down and burn up charts. So essentially blending the elements of Agile with the standard controls that we would expect for Prince, ensuring that the Agile project in Prince does not become fragile. What we also see is that the way that we structure the PRINCE2 Agile project deviates somewhat from the normal PRINCE2 environment. So where we normally had the senior user, executive, and senior supplier, project manager, and team manager, we can now see a blend of customer representative. We can see supply representative. We can start seeing maybe a scrum master as a team manager, all blending into this way of driving PRINCE2 Agile. We also see that within the PRINCE2 Agile product, there's a fascinating technique which is called Cynefin, which is a Welsh term which essentially talks about cause and effect. And this tool that we train in allows us to look at a project when it comes in to decide whether it's business as usual, whether it's actually a project requiring a complicated environment that might require us to rather use standard Prince or maybe PRINCE2 Agile, whether it's a very complex environment where we may not essentially know what the best approach is and it's going to have to be on trial and error, or an environment that is absolutely chaotic, which essentially means we've got no basis to know whether this is business as usual, a project, or agile. So this particular technique called Cynefin is a tool that we train in on this particular course to allow the project manager to discern whether the requirements that are coming in should really be done as business as usual, whether they should be done as a typical PRINCE2 project, whether they could be done as a PRINCE2 Agile project, or whether we really have no reference at all as to how this can be done, because it essentially is turning our current environment on its head. So part of what you can see from what we teach in this particular program, we still leverage the fundamental benefits of PRINCE2. We don't try and reteach those, because obviously people who come on this course are already PRINCE2 smart, but we teach all of the agile techniques and blend those into PRINCE2 to show the delegate exactly how they can take the best of what they've learned in Prince and the best that we will teach them in Agile and blend them together to form what we now refer to as PRINCE2 Agile. You will also see elements that relate to things like prioritization and Moscow, and also the fundamental use of things like Scrum are also blended into PRINCE2 Agile. So what you can see from this slide at a very snapshot level is how PRINCE2 still depends on SU, IP, the delivery of CS and CP, the MP process and DP. All of those processes are still there, but what we've done is we've blended into those the standard agile practices that have become so valuable in the way that we deliver work together. So rather than wondering how you fit this together, PRINCE2 Agile as a product and the course that DDLS delivers will actually teach the delegate how to physically do this. And then obviously to set you up in the practical process in order to take the practitioner exam to show you how in practice these two elements physically work. So who will benefit from PRINCE2 Agile? Well, certainly existing PRINCE2 practitioners. And this is an important one because in order to sit this particular program, you must already be a PRINCE2 practitioner. Because on this course, we are not trying to reteach you Prince. You should already know Prince. What we are teaching is how to blend agile practices into the tried and tested levels of PRINCE2 already. So that's quite fundamental. Also, PRINCE2 practitioners who currently direct and manage PRINCE2 projects and encounter team members who want to make use of agile practices to deliver work, obviously this course is for them. PRINCE2 organizations or departments that are now wanting to adapt agile practices. If you have a look at PRINCE2, organizations have spent a lot of time, money, and effort embedding Prince or training them people in Prince. To now simply abandon that and try and adapt agile practices seems like a waste of that investment. What PRINCE2 Agile does is says, no, take the investment that you've made in Prince, take the investment that you've made in Agile, and we'll show you how to blend that so that 1 and 1 equals 3. There's no throwaway that is required in this particular course. So when a delegate comes on this course, we don't say abandon what you know about Prince and abandon what you know about Agile. We say take what you know about Prince and take what you know about Agile, and we'll show you how to blend those two pieces together. And if you know nothing about Agile, we'll teach you about Agile and how to blend that into Prince2. Obviously, PRINCE2 organizations and departments that are encountering or interfacing with other organizations and departments that are using agile practices. So you might find that as an organization, you've spent a lot of time investing in Prince, but your customers are working towards agile. How do you still add value to your customer running a project using Prince and agile? This course will show you exactly how to do that. organizations or departments that are using Agile practices and wish to adopt PRINCE2. This is fascinating. We think that it's only PRINCE2 environments that need to adopt to Agile. There are Agile environments that are realizing, hang on, we're also getting a lot of fragility. We need to have some level of control. Maybe we need to think about PRINCE2 and using PRINCE2 to give us the control while we deliver with agility. So interesting that we've got some backward engineering as well as some forward engineering in the products. Organizations and departments that are growing and maturing their project management practices are realizing, hang on, there's not just one way, there are many ways that we can get project work done. So that's why we said before, PRINCE2 Agile is not the way, it is a way. Organizations that are maturing in project management will know that there are certain projects will use Agile. There will be certain projects that use Prince, and then there will be projects that we require the blend in order to get the best benefit for the customer. How is PRINCE2 certification delivered as I end off this webinar? Well, firstly, it's delivered as a certification that is taken at practitioner level. So there is no PRINCE2 Agile Foundation. There is only PRINCE2 Agile Practitioner. The reason for that is because we are taking Agile practices and blending them into PRINCE2, which means in order to be able to know how to do that, you can't be at a PRINCE2 Foundation level. You have to be at a PRINCE2 Practitioner level. And so this is an extension of your PRINCE2 Practitioner certification into PRINCE2 Agile Practitioner certification. That's quite fundamental. Therefore, to sit the new PRINCE2 Agile Practitioner, a candidate must hold a current PRINCE2 Practitioner certification. So for those of you who are PRINCE2 practitioners, you know that your PRINCE2 Practitioner certification only lasts 5 years before it lapses. So if your certification in PRINCE2 has lapsed, then DDLS offer a one-day recertification program, which essentially gets you to refresh on PRINCE2, to sit your practitioner re-registration exam, and then essentially provide you with a prerequisite to go through to PRINCE2 Agile. However, as you know, you wouldn't be able to sit the refresher on the Friday and then come to the PRINCE2 Agile on the Monday. The reason for that is because obviously your exam papers have to be sent to Canberra for marking. It takes about 5 to 7 days for your exam results to come back in order to see whether you've passed your practitioner resit for PRINCE2. Only once you've got that can you actually attend the PRINCE2 Agile. Obviously, if you are already a PRINCE2 practitioner and you're within the 5-year cycle, well then obviously you qualify as a prerequisite to sit the PRINCE2 Agile course and obviously the PRINCE2 Agile practitioner exam. The DDLS PRINCE2 Agile certification is delivered as a 3.5-day program. Now we know that there are suppliers out there that are delivering it as a 3-day program. The problem with that is that it is a very tight program to fit into 3 days, given that essentially we are learning Agile practices, we are then refreshing on PRINCE2 practices, and we're learning the blending process. Now to try and fit all of that in to 2.5 days with a PRINCE2 Agile 2.5-hour practitioner exam at the end of day 3 is really, really tight. And essentially, DDLS is not about quantity, it is about quality. We're interested in your certification in PRINCE2 Agile, but we also are interested in ensuring that you understand exactly how this blending process works. There's nothing worse than coming on a course where you're pumped full of theory and then leave at the end of it not really knowing how to actually go about applying this. And this is why we do it as a 3.5-day program. So essentially, the first 3 days are really all of the practices of PRINCE2 Agile, the theory, the practices of how to do this, the concepts, the tools, and the techniques. We work through a sample practitioner paper through that 3-day program. We then give you a second sample paper to work on the evening of the 3rd day. We answer your questions on the morning of the 4th day, and we then run the 2.5-hour practitioner certification exam towards mid-morning of that particular fourth day, which means that you should be finished with your certification by lunchtime of the fourth day. So essentially a 3.5-day program rather than a sausage machine approach of trying to just push everybody through 3 days. We can certainly do that, but we feel fundamentally that the quality is compromised when you do it in that particular way. So we are offering at DDLS a 3.5-day program, and we think the logic is right for that. The cost of the course includes the program delivery using certified and accredited trainers, all meals and refreshments, 2 full sample papers, a copy of the new PRINCE2 Agile guidance, as well as the live exam itself. So essentially, we believe that this bundle of value is the best offering that we can provide to those who are already PRINCE2 practitioners and are interested in knowing how PRINCE2 Agile works and looking at the value that they can add to the projects that they might operate in, where they're needing to blend Agile practices with the traditional PRINCE2 approach. So a bit of food for thought as I close off today, and this comes from Stephen Hawking. Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. And I think PRINCE2 has recognized that it needs to adapt to change, and that change is the change of a world using Agile. So Agile is all about adapting to change. It was built on the fundamental principle that business drivers will change and that development teams must be ready to adapt. And I think with PRINCE2 Agile, what Axelos have brought out here for those PRINCE2 practitioners is certainly a way of taking the world of Agile change and blending it in that tried and tested way of PRINCE2 and bringing to us PRINCE2 Agile. So I hope that this afternoon's webinar has given you some appetite for considering PRINCE2 Agile and not try to do this on your own. There is some really effective benefits in attending a course of this nature. We do a lot of work in terms of showing how PRINCE2 and Agile is blended. We use some very interesting case studies to show how that works, a series of role-play exercises to take the theory and blend it into practice, and then obviously to prepare you for that very important PRINCE2 Agile practitioner exam, which becomes essentially valuable currency on your CV, value to your organization, and value to the projects that you will deliver, hopefully in the future, using PRINCE2 Agile. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Clinton, for a very informative session there. I hope that everybody got a lot out of that. So what we might do now, Clinton, is we actually have a few questions from our audience.
Yes.
So the first question comes from Katie, and she asks, will the course be more suitable for someone who's done PRINCE2 and Agile before?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. Because people who have only ever worked in a PRINCE2 environment and are now encountering Agile, obviously this course not only refreshes them on PRINCE2, but it certainly teaches all of the new Agile behaviors, the concepts, the different tools and techniques. An individual who has used PRINCE2 and is also familiar with Agile, well, obviously the course shows them how to blend the stuff they know about Agile and the stuff that they know about PRINCE2, and shows them exactly where in the PRINCE2 process might they actually do a backlog, where in the process might they run a sprint, where in the process would they do a retrospective, where in the process would they produce a burned out chart, where in the process might they know that they're going to have to raise an exception because the boundaries of the project, the breadth of the project is threatened, while not needing to raise any exceptions while the depth of the project is being explored by the team. So you can see that the course will teach those who are both familiar with both practices as well as those who are only familiar with one practice.
Thank you, Clinton, for that. Katie, I hope that answers your question. We actually have another question from Tessa. And her question is, it seems Agile is very much new to the delivery phase within P2. What are your views on that?
Oh, absolutely. Agile is fundamentally a framework for delivery. However, teams who like to use Agile in delivery like to feel that they're empowered, like to feel that they are in control of the work that they do. they want to be able to be very clear on the fact that they can renegotiate priorities, that they can explore the detail of the scope of the project without necessarily having to raise an exception. So essentially, PRINCE2 recognizes that that way of work is absolutely fundamental. But how do you blend that way of work with the fact that we are still running a project, and that the project still has constraints, that the project still has a steering committee, that the project still has a project manager that has to take responsibility for the day-to-day running of the project? So what PRINCE2 Agile does, it takes the best of Prince at the control level and blends it with the empowerment practices of Agile at the delivery level. So now what we see is, rather than the PRINCE2 project manager saying, okay, well, once I hand the work packages off to the team, it's really up to them to do it, and I don't really know how they do it. What PRINCE2 Agile shows is exactly how the team are going to get the work done while they use the Agile practices, and how the PRINCE2 project manager dovetails with those practices in order to create a symbiotic relationship between the controlling of the project and the delivery of the project, which in stock standard PRINCE2 we've not always seen.
Thank you for that, Clint. So I hope that answers your question too. I actually have a question from Mike. Can you take the PRINCE2 Agile course and opt out of the practitioner exam?
A wonderful question. No, not really, because in order to attend the actual course, you need to be a PRINCE2 practitioner. If you want just an overview of PRINCE2 Agile and want to get a broad understanding of the concepts and perspectives without necessarily having to go through the full three days and sit the exam, PRINCE2 does offer a one-day PRINCE2 Agile overview. Obviously, that doesn't include any exams. It doesn't include all of the real fine bits of what we would cover as we cover a three-day course. And so that might suit your question. However, if you want to sit the full 3 day and you are a PRINCE2 practitioner, you're not interested in taking the exam, you're more than welcome to come along. But it would almost be a shame that you wouldn't sit the exam itself. If you're not chasing the certification, you could obviously opt out at the end of the 3rd day, but you would still have to be a current PRINCE2 practitioner to actually sit the actual course itself, even though you might not want to take the exam. So if you're just coming for an overview and not the exam, I'd go for the 1 day overview. If you're coming to understand all of the detail, but you don't really want to sit the exam, then obviously be our guest and come along. But essentially, it would be worth your while to sit the practitioner because it's such a valuable currency to have on your CV.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Clinton. And I think we actually have time for one more question. So the question actually comes from Steve, and his question is, where does the role of the product owner fit within the PRINCE2 Agile?
Yes, great question again. Now, the product owner is essentially embedded in the solution team. So they would be working within the delivery team itself. So that product owner could, on a small PRINCE2 Agile project, may in fact also take the role of senior user. They may take that role of senior user. Although what we try and show in the PRINCE2 Agile course is, because there's a blending of the typical Agile roles with the PRINCE2 roles, you may replace the senior user role with the product owner role. But if it was a fairly large project, you might find that you still have a senior user, as you have in PRINCE2, and you have product owners sitting at the solution delivery level where the actual Agile practices are being delivered. And there could be an interface, obviously, between the product owner and the senior user once you've actually blended the Agile practices with PRINCE2. And that's exactly the type of stuff that we cover on this particular course. So that's a perfect question that shows the blending nature of the different Agile roles with the PRINCE2 roles, where the PRINCE2 roles and the Agile roles may stay as they are, or how they might be blended to suit the situation of the project itself. So that's a really good question.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that, Clint.